Welcome to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast. Your chance to learn about the teachings of the Catholic Church on sacred music, both in theory and practice. Through interviews, discussions, and music, your hearts and minds will be lifted up and better understand what it means to sing the praise of His glory. And now, your host, Dr. Jennifer Donaldson-Nowicka.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast, the official podcast of the Catholic Institute of Sacred Music. My guest today is Dr. Rosemary Heredos, a fantastic singer of chant, and she discusses with me her technical development as a singer of chant, especially employing semiological study and performance practice. Dr. Heredos will be here teaching a seminar on this very topic this summer at the Catholic Institute of Sacred Music, June 29th to July 3rd. There is still time to apply to study with her in this graduate level class as a non-degree seeking student. More information is available on our website, catholicinstituteofsacredmusic.org, and click on Summer Classes. The deadline to apply is May 1st. She'll be teaching this vocal technique seminar in the afternoons, and the morning class will be a semiological seminar based on manuscript and repertoire study with Dr. Edward Schaefer. We hope you can join us. And now, on to the interview. Thank you so much for joining me today, Rosemary. It's always lovely to hear you sing, and I'm really excited to talk to you about the lovely sound that you produce and how you teach that to others. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here.
Sometimes the choral world and voice teacher world don't really get along, as anyone who's lived in either of them knows, and it can be really hard for singers who want to develop a healthy technique while singing sacred music to find the right teacher or approach in navigating their own training. Can you tell us a little bit about your background as a singer and how you ended up completing a doctorate in historical performance practice?
Yeah, it's an incredible journey that I've been on, and one that I look at as very providential. I'm just so grateful for all of the wonderful teachers that I've gotten to work with along the way and wonderful artists that I've learned from. So I was, as a teenager, really into opera. I took voice lessons from age 11. My grandparents arranged for me to have lessons with a local teacher. So I worked on a lot of, young soprano repertoire and art song. And I was always very interested in early music, but also later big 19th century opera. And when I went to university, I was doing a double major in English literature and also in vocal performance at Kent State University. So there I got to study with the wonderful tenor Tim Culver and worked on, a lot of coloratura repertoire and a lot of French art song. So I was really invested in that. I kind of intended to go on with my English degree studies in graduate school, but I loved music and I knew I would always be teaching voice and singing. And then by actually taking some medieval literature courses in the English department was where things really clicked for me. I would see footnotes reading Breton lays. This could have been sung, but we don't know exactly how. So that was the impetus for me to really begin exploring early music. And so then I applied to various early music master's programs. I saw it as a way to really combine my love of studying text and manuscripts and also my love of singing and vocal technique. And I ended up discovering this wonderful master's degree in Ireland at the University of Limerick. So I went there and I got to study vocal technique with Catherine Sargent, who is a wonderful chant and early polyphony specialist, sings with the ensemble Discantus in Paris. And working with her and also Mari Walsh at the University of Limerick, who's trained many wonderful singers, a lot of opera singers, but other genres of singers as well in Ireland. And it was there that a lot of vocal technique specific to chant really clicked for me. And I'll talk much more about this later on, but to me, the key is the breath and the consistency of breath flow, which is applicable to, of course, all singing, I think, but there's some really specific ways that we can achieve a really clear sound in generally large acoustics that we would be singing chant. So a lot of that really locked into place for me there in Limerick. And it really became evident that singing chant and studying liturgy was my calling to kind of integrate sound and mind and voice and soul, and the rest is history. And so I stayed there in Ireland a bit to continue studying with Katrine and singing in our female chant ensemble there, Cantoral. And then I came back to the States to complete a doctorate in historical performance practice at Case Western Reserve University. And I also got to study with wonderful voice teachers there, the legendary Ellen Hargis. So definitely working on chant and Aquitanian polyphony with her, which she had recorded with Sequencia. So that was exciting, but also her other repertoire, which I also love, lute song, some early opera, monody. So grateful to have gotten to work with her there, and also the soprano Dina Kuznetsova at the Cleveland Institute for Music, a wonderful vocal technician and just beautiful person who I continue to revisit for tune-ups. And whenever I've had some vocal health issues over the years, love going back to her. So really sound technique and teachers who really work on opening up the individual voice, really honing in on what is the timbre of this voice, my voice as the student. What is this voice capable of? How can we explore that? And how can we explore it in the healthiest way possible for whatever repertoire we happen to be focusing on, which in my life has primarily been chant.
Yeah, but it sounds like you discovered chant through voice lessons and through study rather than through the liturgy itself, which is, always it's a grace to be able to have that experience, but it's also a little sad sometimes when we look back on it and say, like, why didn't the church give me this itself?
Yes, that's definitely something I've even wept over in my personal life. And I mean, I grew up Catholic and at a really beautiful small country parish. And we did a little bit. I grew up singing the ordinaries during Advent and Lent in Latin with no particular chant method, but I was always really interested in that aspect of Catholicism and the continuity through the ages that our music can provide. So it was always there, but yes, it was not something that I learned through doing liturgy at first. And so integrating that then, as I was discovering this in my studies, was and is really important to me.
Yeah, but it is interesting that you had that experience in a small country parish, as you know.
Mhm.
Even now, when there is a greater access to chant and chant training, and
Mhm.
it usually doesn't filter out all the way into small parishes. So God was providing for you somehow there.
Yes, yeah, a wonderful priest who loved history, and really wonderful music volunteers who led the music, and as a child and teenager that I got to sing with. So yeah, we had a really special choir, and primarily non-chant music, but really edifying musical experiences for the time. And I'm so grateful for the little bit of chant that I did get, and I really strive to share that in my work as a parish music director now, and with a lot of children that I teach, to try to give them what I wish I had more of when I was growing up as a child.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you could describe what your voice training looked like along the way. You've talked a little bit about, your collegiate training, and then
Mhm.
I'm just wondering if you want to approach that question either through repertoire or some specific technical things. But I'd be grateful for a sort of trajectory of your discovery of your own voice in this repertoire.
Mhm. Yeah, I was singing for as long as I can remember, and by the time I was 10 or 11 years old, I was just really interested in opera. I remember checking out CDs from the library and listening to Puccini, and that was a big part of the whole kind of 19th century culture that I loved from a literary perspective as well. Then also my mom's family is Irish American, so I grew up singing Irish traditional music and really immersed in that orality and learning things by ear. And the type of really light and agile sound that you hear from a lot of Irish traditional singers. So kind of both at once. And my family, God bless them, were so supportive and arranged for me to kind of channel that into formal study of voice lessons. And so, yeah, just really exploratory. And my high school teacher, who was actually the music director at the parish where I am now music director, so we've kind of come full circle. Yeah, had studied at Boston Conservatory, so was a very good technician and really great at working with young singers in this local, very rural community where I grew up. So yeah, the usual 24 Italian songs and arias, some folk song, kind of classical arrangements, a lot of Henry Purcell. I really loved his texts and music, and then getting into some more serious opera repertoire. And I started doing some master classes and competitions in high school with that kind of a repertoire. For me, I always loved really delving into the text and telling the story of the music. And I think that set me up really well for chant analysis and practice. And then from a timbre perspective, I wouldn't say that working on timbre was anything that I was ever particularly taught, but just how to sing clearly and well supported in these different types of repertoire, how to have clear diction, thinking rhetorically about text. That has been a huge aspect all the way through all of my studies, up through my doctorate and beyond. Music as a tradition, as a context of the culture from which it emerges. And so then, as I was slowly discovering chant through these studies, finding how timeless chant is amidst all of these music from different times and places. And chant is from and of and transcends all of those.
Yeah.
So it's really been the kind of fulfillment of all of my musical study.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about working with a teacher on chant repertory. One of the things that we are working with our students here, our applicants for our Master of Sacred Music degree program, they're required to take 4 semesters of voice lesson. And so, they need to find a voice teacher that is willing to teach them those things. And, they're from all over the country. And so not just like in one location around an early music program. And so there's a little bit of adventuresomeness required in both for the student to approach a teacher about this repertory and then for the teacher to feel comfortable in that repertory. And it sounds like, you've had teachers who feel comfortable in that repertory naturally.
Mm-hmm.
But what would you say made them have that comfort level? And what would you say to a student looking for a teacher and finding that all they want to teach them is art song and aria?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think the biggest way for somebody to be comfortable with teaching chant is singing a lot of chant. And I was really lucky to kind of come back from lukewarmness of faith through chant in an academic world. And so to some degree, I think the beauty and truth of chant speaks for itself if you immerse yourself in it. But I also feel that there's so much there so I teach voice lessons at the Institute for Sacred Music at St. Meinrad Arch Abbey. And those are my favorite voice lessons I think I get to teach because I can fully embrace like talking about the theology and faith and connecting the somatic journey of learning to sing and learning to sing this repertoire to spiritual journeys and all of these really important things that to me, as someone who's studied historical performance practice, where you read all of the treatises surrounding this performance practice, you look at the culture from which it's emerging and who are these people who were making, creating, and performing this music. And with chant, finding a teacher who is immersed in that world is wonderful, but I think we can learn a lot from people who are not necessarily plugged into the liturgical context as well. And so the historical performance practice world of chant and medieval music has a lot to offer. And I bring so much of that into how I teach chant, studying regional historical pronunciations of Latin, which may or may not have a place in today's liturgies, but can be a really instructive way to look at the way that music and text come together to create new meaning. And comparative manuscript studies. Again, in a liturgical setting, you're probably singing from the Liber Usualis or the Graduale Triplex or the square notes, Graduale Romanum. So you might not need to go that deeply, but I think that going that deep can be an exercise in musical Lectio Divina. And to me, that is as important, or maybe even more important than, learning the notes and the technique. Finding a teacher who can address all of that is great, or finding different teachers who can address different parts, and then you synthesize that in your own practice and in your own spiritual life as a liturgical musician.
I'm wondering if you could take us through some of the most common vocal technique problems that you find in people coming to you to sing chant.
Mm-hmm.
How have you addressed them with those students or within even your own ensemble in a group setting?
Yeah. So I often have kind of two different types of students who come to me. People who have had little vocal training before, but are really on fire about learning chant. And that's so exciting to bring them through that. And then there are often people who have had a lot of vocal training who, for whatever reason, spiritual, professional, or some mix of both, who are, perhaps have had graduate study in voice and are kind of newly coming to chant. So for both of those types of students, I think a big issue that we try to work on that's unique to chant is how to create really clear lines that are legato. And legato is legato, but when you're singing an a cappella, and particularly a really florid line of chant in a large acoustic, there are things to consider with the mode of the piece and what are your most important pitches. A lot of singers who come to me have had no theoretical training in mode. So it's part of modern Western tonality. We know the tonic and the dominant are really important, and they also are in chant. Modes work a little bit differently, but having all of those tools for very quickly analyzing mode and integrating that into how we execute the performance of a chant and how that influences shaping lines and creating this legato phrase. So with my students, we'll spend the first part of each lesson just strictly focusing on technique. And so I am very adamant that singing is a full body experience and one that integrates body and mind and soul. So we will do some stretches, physical stretches, arms, neck, especially to get rid of any tension that we might have brought in from the outside world into our voice lesson. And then working on breath. So we'll locate the core muscles, doing little or sounds, and then working on building breath support and lengthening phrases. A very popular one with my students is to inhale for, say, start with the count of 4, inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and do that in several iterations. And when 4 feels good, bump it up to 6 or 8, up to, say, 20, and to build our capacity for breath in that way. And then to bring that into phrases. And I'm a huge proponent of semi-occluded vocal tract exercises. So that is where you'll be doing some sort of buzzing or lip trills. You can do it with a straw, the work of Inigo Titze, the great vocalist. If you look him up on YouTube, you can see exercises with a straw, which will provide a little bit of air resistance, and it creates this kind of vacuum in the vocal tract where the vocal folds can really come together and vibrate in the most efficient way. It's like a little larynx massage. It's a great recovery exercise, but it's also a great just get your airflow going at the beginning of a lesson or a practice session. And I really find in my own practice and with my students, if you get all of that set up first, it makes for a much more efficient work through the repertoire. So we might buzz or lip trill. Usually I have them pick their favorite of these through an entire chant to really work on that airflow and placement. For example, so we're coming up on Laetare Sunday. So for the introit antiphon, you might buzz it on lip trills to really focus on that continuous stream of air and a really smooth contour, very legato, each note connected to the last. And then once you've got that down, you can then add the words back in. And that leap of a fourth there can be really tricky to not have a little hitch where the breath kind of pops in and out. So we could go Laetare Jerusalem. And you'll notice I'm doing some rearticulations according to the Sangal neumes, which is my preferred practice with semiology. But yeah, so really working the ta to really get that nice and smooth and all one gesture. I find when I was first transitioning from a more operatic classical world into the chant world, the tendency to just kind of pop up to high notes as I was still building modal awareness with little awareness of what are the structural pitches of the mode. So yeah, it's, I think, a repertoire that really requires so many different levels of thought, mode, text, theology, and integrating all of that together with vocal technique.
I'm wondering if you could address the issue of dynamic contrast. I'm sure you also have the experience of, hiring professional singers for a mass or an event, and they can learn the music in a way, but there's always this problem of not being soft, for example, at the ends of phrases in chant, and they seem to think that it's somehow impossible to be as soft as is necessary, or they have a hard time controlling the legato in softer sounds and with a lot of flexibility between dynamics. I'm wondering how you address that flexibility issue, always supported by breath.
Yeah, it's so important to always be supported by breath. So I suppose it would depend on the context. If it's in a larger group, we're always striving for una voce. So I do lots of little exercises for that in my groups of having different singers take a turn kind of leading and having everybody try to sing within that sound. Like, this is the lead, one voice, and now you're creating one voice around that. So when there are singers who are singing much more loudly, when they're not the ones leading, then they tend to just tone it down when they know, when they're instructed to be kind of following along. And by having everybody do it, again, like thinking theologically about it, I think chant requires us to listen in a way that other music does not. All music requires listening, but chant is really special, getting everybody to be singing with the same method, and then the fine details within that of dynamics and phrasing. then specifically for individual voices where loud dynamics, like you mentioned, are an issue, these types of semi-occluded vocal tract exercises are super helpful because you can't do them correctly whilst making like your maximum forte sound. They're by their very nature a bit of a lighter onset, a bit of a softer sound. So integrating that sound into when you sing fully on the words, that can be helpful, I think, for singers to find a well-supported but softer sound. Yeah, I would say that's the main thing. I know the word blend in a group is can be triggering to many singers. I never ask my singers to make their voice sound not like their voice, because I'm a big fan of Saint Hildegard's theology, and in her Cosmos, humans were literally created to be the 10th choir of heaven. After Satan and his minions fell, those seats were empty in heaven, and God creates humans to sing with the 9 choirs of angels. And so in her theology, in her Cosmos, our lives are us rediscovering the ability to sing that Adam and Eve had in the Garden of Eden. And so I really firmly believe that each person's voice is precious and intentional, and learning to channel that into singing una voce in a group is kind of a microcosm for Christian life and unity in the church at large. And so these exercises, I think, can be specific instructions in order to work towards that ideal.
Let's talk about the third rail, vibrato.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about, let's say, especially if someone has had bel canto training most of their lives and they're trying to work their way to this repertoire,
Mm-hmm.
that notion of control of vibrato as an ornament,
Mm-hmm.
like you would experience in early music training. How do you make that jump from a bel canto nearly continuous presence of vibrato to that early music sound?
Yeah, it's such an important issue, and one that I think many singers unfortunately have a lot of trauma surrounding. And so I will say right out, you will never hear me say sing without vibrato. However, I do really think that in chant, singing with less oscillation of the pitch, but still a really supported tone where the breath is spinning out, it gives it that sparkle. So if we're singing, there's a little bit of glimmer to that, but it's a relatively straight tone. So the free breath and no tension in the jaw and neck. When I see, unfortunately, some choir directors ask for no vibrato, there's this immediate clenching and an immediate kind of stoppage of that consistent breath flow. And in chant, and I would say especially in my preferred method of semiology, where you've got all of these little ornamental figures in chant, the quilisma, the pressus, the oriscus, which are described variously by medieval writers in the church as tremulous pitches. If we sing with too much vibrato, then when we get to places like that, there's not a lot of room for them to sound different, set apart, extra tremulous. So like a quilisma is typically over 3 notes, typically an ascending third, with the middle note being quavered or tremulous. Having just enough glimmer in our normal status quo, proceeding smoothly through a chant line, I think leaves a lot of room then for providing that extra little shake. And another thing that I love about chant is that each voice has different capabilities of how to execute these. And so I learned very specifically from my teachers, especially in Ireland, from Catherine Sargent, how in her practice she does these based on reading treatises and widespread early music performance practice in her Discantus ensemble. But when I work with groups, by listening to each other, we can really find a way, if we have the time, to really develop this unified sound where each voice is kind of giving its own glimmer to these little ornamental shapes and within a really nice legato line. So depending on who my group is, who I'm singing with or conducting, there would be small differences in how we would execute this because we are listening to each other and making this phrasing work for the capacity of our singers. The size of the group will really influence that. And a lot of the early treatise writers and commentators would say that in a large group, perhaps not everybody is executing these little ornamental figures. They'll still come through if a few, say, like the main cantors of a monastery are doing these. So it's a great opportunity for singers of all backgrounds and all levels to explore what their voices are capable of, and for a really special sound reflective of the unique time and place and unique prayers of all of the individuals in that choir.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about this summer. You're teaching
Yes.
for us at the Catholic Institute of Sacred Music, June 29th through July 3rd, and you're teaching a performance practicum on chant, in which singing chant according to semiological analysis and interpretation is the approach. So can you tell us what students in your class might expect?
Yeah, a lot of singing and a lot of reading. I'm so looking forward to it, and we'll spend a lot of every class working in kind of a practicum setting in the way that I primarily learned chant, which it's so crucial to have an oral element to the way that we learn chant, because it was originally an oral practice, and the semiological method based a lot on St. Gall neumes and also the neumes of Laon and other regional dialects, are this moment where we are transitioning from a completely oral tradition into a literate one. And as I already mentioned, someone who sings Irish traditional music, already being immersed in a living oral tradition, I just find chant and studying these St. Gall manuscripts in particular such a magical moment to get to watch that unfold in real life. And so unfortunately, we don't have singers from, the year 900 to listen to, but we have their kind of memory notes that are these neumes. So learning melodies by ear and learning these ornaments by ear, doing short little repeat after me phrases, will be a huge part of this instruction. And then also, and I do believe that the students will also be taking a class in semiology in the morning, so they'll be immersed in these manuscripts already, taking very close reading of the neumes and finding ways to sing that as a soloist. So of course the solo verses on say a gradual or an alleluia, but then also how to sing this as a scola, and a lot of these issues that we've been talking about, how to sing una voce. I will definitely be having students doing both, taking turns as soloists and then putting this all together into a cohesive scola sound. And we'll also be reading some of the commentaries that I've already mentioned. Writings of Notker are where we get a lot of our knowledge about what the little significative letters mean in these manuscripts. So for example, to do with pacing, there will be a little C written above the neumes, which stands for celeriter, or a T for tenete. So these letters from Notker are where we get a lot of that information from. Other sources, Ademar de Chaban, who was an Aquitanian cantor who had a lot to say about performance practice, and many others. And then also, as you've noticed, I think in every question you've asked, I've talked a bit about vocal technique and a bit about like theology. And to me, that's really integral to decisions that we make surrounding technique and performance practice. So reading saints and doctors of the church, what they have to say about the theology of singing. And so I'm sure St. Augustine and St. Hildegard and many others will show up in the class reading and integrating all of that together into our performance practice. And then also, as I mentioned, historical regional pronunciations. So, for example, when I sing the music of St. Hildegard, she lived in 12th century Germany on the Rhine. So pronouncing Latin as scholars believe it would have been pronounced in her time and place. And likewise, the Sangol manuscripts, pronouncing it with Carolingian Frankish Latin that would have been used by the people in that time and place. And the differences from kind of modern ecclesiastical Latin, how does that reflect the way that we sing? Not to give spoilers for the class, but I think there's a gentleness to some of the way that these words would have been pronounced in these regional pronunciations. And that can really help us achieve the unified, smooth, not loud sound that we've been kind of discussing here. Yeah, all of these to kind of add to our toolkit as performers of chant and building our practice together over that week in the summer.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. This has been really wonderful. And I'm sure that students will be interested in checking out learning more from you. And so they can visit Catholic Institute of Sacred Music.org, click on summer classes. And is there a website that they can learn more about you as a singer?
Yeah, I was going to share just a little recording of what semiology can sound like. This is a recording that I made during my doctorate at Case Western Reserve University. We have some wonderful fragments in our library on campus of chant and other music. So this is Sangol neumes that were on this random fragment that we have in the library. So it's not concordant particularly with what you would find in the Graduale triplex. It's the same melody, but there are many differences that I put together. So this is adiastomatic notation. There's no pitch contour. So I looked at other later pitched manuscripts from this region and collated them this is the offertory Filiae Regum. So I'll just play a little bit of this so you can get a taste of what semiology can sound like.
Thank you so much for sharing this lovely recording and for your time and sharing your experience as a singer. It's very inspiring to hear someone really apply so many things together and integrate them together in their life as a Catholic. And I know that listeners will be really inspired by you.
Thank you so much. So looking forward to joining you this summer.
We hope you've enjoyed listening to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast with Dr. Jennifer Donaldson-Nowicka. For more information about this episode, sacred music resources, or upcoming events, visit our website at sacredmusicpodcast.com. You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. If you enjoy our podcast, please write us a review on iTunes. This improves our iTunes ranking and helps others find out about the podcast. The music you heard at the beginning of this episode is Hec Dies by William Byrd, sung by the London Oratory's Schola Cantorum Boys Choir, directed by Charles Cole from the CD Sacred Treasures of England. The music at the conclusion of this podcast is from the Prelude and Fugue in G Major, BWV 550 by Johann Sebastian Bach, performed by Jennifer Donaldson-Nowicka. We look forward to having you join us next time, and until then, may we sing the praise of His glory.